Great. Thank you all so much. I'm grateful for all of you coming back, finishing up the conference with me. I'm Daryl VAN TONGEREN, professor of psychology at Hope College and director of the Frost Center for Social Science Research. So I have the good fortune of also directing a research center that broadly supports social science research. So even if you're not in psychology and you're doing any kind of social science research and you're looking for international collaborations, please feel free to reach out to me. So this whole conference has been about positive psychology 2.0, right? So the combination of the light and the dark, the suffering and the positive. And so I thought that what I would do is we would just take some time together to talk a little bit about how to frame religion within that framework of an existential positive psychology approach. And so I very recently wrote a paper for the International Journal of Applied Positive Psychology. They have a special issue coming out on critiques of positive psychology, and I was an invited author to contribute an article. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to write about, I decided that I wanted to write about what I called positive psychology's existential crisis. And there's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek play on words for two reasons. So on the one hand, broadly what I was arguing is that positive psychology, as it's currently going, is facing an existential crisis. That if positive psychology does not change course, I don't actually think that positive psychology is going to, it's not going to last in meaningful ways. But I think that one of the ways that it needs to change course, one of the things that it needs to incorporate is an appreciation for the existential. It needs to bring in that other side of what it means to fully be human. And so what I argued in this paper, and there's many great papers in this special issue, I encourage you to check it out. I argued for basically 7 recommendations that positive psychology should consider, right? And this is really embracing what Dr. Chan has put together in this Positive Psychology 2.0 conference, 7 recommendations for how positive psychology should move forward. So the first is that I believe that we need to embrace a more balanced view of what it means to flourish. So it's not just always having positive affect all the time, right? We're always the predominance of positivity to the exclusion of the negative. We need to have a more balanced understanding of what it means to flourish. The second thing that I think that positive psychology needs to do is have an appreciation for the fact that it's dealing with humans that are bound within existential realities. That even though I can cultivate positive thoughts and relationships and institutions and cultures, I'm still going to die one day. And I still need to navigate what the meaning of my life is. And I still feel existentially isolated from other people. None of those things are untrue, but they need to be, positive psychology needs to be aware of those things as it's making its recommendations. The third is I think that we need to have a richer view of flourishing by accounting for suffering. I think particularly in the West, and America in particular is very bad at this. We're very, very bad at this. We think that flourishing is only possible if you don't suffer. And so what do? We try to eliminate all of suffering. That's not possible. You can't eliminate all of suffering. To live is to suffer. If any of you have lived long enough, you have suffered. If any of you have not suffered, just wait. It's coming, right? And you're very lucky that you have not suffered. But to live is to suffer. And so rather than saying the only way to flourish is by having no suffering, I think we can flourish in our suffering. I think there are times when we are suffering, we can still flourish. We can still have a full life. The fourth thing I recommended is that we need to start finding boundary conditions for some of the positive psychology constructs that we study. For example, one of the very first things that I studied in graduate school was forgiveness. And forgiveness is very good. There's so many benefits for forgiveness. It improves your health. It improves your relationships. Numerous benefits. Is forgiveness always the best thing to do? Well, I don't know. What if someone's exploiting you? right? What if someone's taking advantage of you all the time? Should you continually forgive like into perpetuity? Well, I'm not sure. Humility. So the next thing I studied after forgiveness, and for the past decade, I've been studying humility. And humility, we see all these benefits, right? And humility is this awareness of our limitations. It's owning our biases. It's checking your egoistic motives and thinking of other people. Humility is very, very good. But can we be too humble? Or are there drawbacks to being humble? Right? Are there dark sides to being humble? So we need to figure out these boundary conditions. The fifth thing that we need to do as a field is we need more methodological rigor. And so Dr. Tyler Vanderweel, one of the other keynotes, was talking about how to get that methodological rigor. Many of you were presenting research on longitudinal studies. That is the type of methodological rigor we need. And we also need experimental methodologies. We need to be able to prove causation. We need to be able to examine in randomized clinical trials the efficacy of being assigned to particular positive psychology interventions. A sixth thing that we need to think about is we need to enhance public trust. So again, maybe this is a little bit more for America or the West, but here's how it usually goes in America. And maybe I'm guilty of this too because I've written a book. But what happens is academics, they go into the science, they find this really important finding, and then they replicate it. And they find it can help people. And then they get this idea, well, I want to help as many people as possible. And those are all noble motives. But then somewhere between the science and translating it broadly, it kind of loses a little bit of its nuance. And what happens is it starts becoming bigger than the science justifies. And so we start thinking, well, all we need to do is this one thing. And then this one thing will make my life instantly better forever, right? Like this one, small life hack. And so positive psychology falls into this trap, right? If I just do X or I just do Y, then everything in my life will be better. And like Dr. Bingaman mentioned, life is much more complicated than that, right? You can't will yourself to well-being. And so what we need to do is we need to continually improve our science so that the public trusts us when we are trying to help them. And then finally, we need to widen the circle of inclusion. And this is one of the things I was most excited about the invitation to come and spend time with you this week, is we need collaborators from all around the world. We need representation of lots of different cultures, lots of different countries. So much of our science is so westernized, is so in democratic, Western industrialized, right? These weird cultures. We need representation from around the world, because if positive psychology is true, it's got to be true everywhere we see it. And so part of where I see positive psychology 2.0 is at this intersection between existential psychology and positive psychology. So for those of you who heard my talk on Wednesday, I thoroughly depressed you by talking about the existential realities of what it means to be human, that we face groundlessness, isolation, identity, and death. And we also know that positive psychology focuses on things like virtues, cultivating strong relationships. It looks at religion. But the overlap between both of these dimensions, between existential psychology and positive psychology, in my mind, the overlap is in cultivating meaning. So existential psychology focuses on what is my meaning, and it acknowledges the meaninglessness that people have to contend with in life. But positive psychology is also about building meaning. And so that's where I've focused my scholarly efforts in my career, is in this overlap of meaning, the overlap between the existential and the positive psychology. So I mentioned this earlier, and I want to return to this because I think this is an important thing for us to talk about. I know I depressed you on Wednesday, I'll depress you again today, but then I promise it'll get better. So suffering is a human universal. It's a human universal. And in fact, thinkers and most religions have long been concerned with how to make sense of human suffering. So if you think about Buddhism, Buddhism embraces the reality that to live is to suffer, right? And there are features of life that are just inherently contributing to our suffering. Within Christianity, the first chronological book written was Job, if I'm to understand it correctly, right? And Job is the story about a guy who's suffering. And the whole book is he's trying to make sense of his suffering. And we learn a few things. One of the things Job learns is his friends are terrible when it comes to being supportive when he's suffering. For those of you who know the story of Job. So Job, for those of you who don't know, Job loses everything in his life, right? His family, his wealth, his home, his health. And he's sitting there and his friends are asking him, well, what'd you do to deserve this? Because that's a terrible friend, right? So for those of you, even if you're not religious, you should read Job just to realize what not to do when your friends are suffering. The second thing, though, is he's trying to make sense of where is God amidst my suffering? Where is the supernatural amidst my suffering? And so the very best minds in the world have long been concerned with how do we make sense of these terrible things that happen. So everybody suffers. And suffering poses a problem. But why is it that suffering poses such a problem? If everybody suffers, right? If everybody has gravity, it's not like gravity is a problem, right? Like everyone's subject to gravity. Why is it that suffering is such a problem? And then what I want to share a little bit about is how might religion offer a solution? So we humans are natural meaning-making animals. So what this means, and we talked a little bit about this on Wednesday, is we have this natural inherent proclivity to create and sustain meaning. So one way of there's lots of ways to think about the brain. They're all great ways. One of the ways I like to think about the brain is that it's a meaning-making organ. We get inputs coming in through our senses, and we translate them into meaningful conceptualizations of reality because we're meaning-making animals. Part of why we do that is to help us navigate the social world and to help us come to terms with core existential concerns. And so one of my very first paper in graduate school, I told my advisor that I really thought that people naturally were meaning makers, and if we told them that if we threatened their sense of meaning, that they would respond to that because we naturally just believe that life is meaningful. And so he said, well, what do you have in mind? And I said, well, I think that we should bring people in the lab and we should tell half of them that their life is meaningless. And he said, well, I don't think we can do that. And I said, okay, well, why not? And he said, well, I think if you were just to tell people that their life is meaningless, they would give you all these reasons why you're wrong, right? So if I were to say your life is meaningless, most of you, so one of you might be like, oh my gosh, it is, and then that would be horrible for you. But some of you might say, no, my life's not meaningless. I've got this, I've got friends, I've got family, I've got all these different things that I do. So instead, what we decided to do was we developed an implicit priming procedure. So half of the participants came in and we subliminally primed them with meaninglessness-related words that were provided to them in the periphery of the visual field too fast for conscious recognition. So 50 milliseconds or less, we just flash meaninglessness-related words in the periphery of their visual field. The other half, we flashed neutral words that were matched in length. And what we found was that people automatically and naturally defend against threats to meaning. So people whose meaning had been threatened actually reported on self-reported questionnaires that they had higher meaning in life afterwards. They reaffirmed their meaning. And for many of them, they said that they were more religious. Now, when we did interviews afterwards and we asked them, did you notice anything interesting or unusual about the study? They said, oh, no. Some of them noticed some flashes, but they would say, could you read any of them? No, they couldn't read what it was. So this happens on an implicit or non-conscious level. And religion is one of those natural responses that people turn to when their meaning is feeling undermined. So what we know, though, is whenever our sense of meaning is undermined, unfortunately, as humans, defensiveness is our default. We get really defensive. So for example, my colleagues and I did a study where we looked at how belief in defensive religiousness. So this is the idea that someone believes that they hold the absolute truth to the religion, that they are special, that God and them have a special relationship, and everybody else who doesn't hold that relationship is bad and is on the out group. Those people actually have a lot higher meaning in life, sadly. That's a really effective way of maintaining meaning. We did another set of studies. This was back in 2015, 2016 during the Ebola outbreak. You might have remembered the Ebola outbreak in Africa. And the United States was considering and instituted some travel bans. And so what we did is we brought participants into the lab and we assigned some of them to a neutral condition, some to think about their own death, and some to think about Ebola. And what we found was that people who were primed with thinking about this Ebola outbreak were much more likely to agree with these national security measures against other countries. But it was only for people who were extrinsically religious. And by that we mean people who were religious, but it wasn't a core part of their identity. Maybe they were religious because of social reasons or because they wanted God to protect them, and not because they actually believed it. Those people were more defensive, and they were more likely to want to ban people who weren't like them. And then we, Mark Brandt and I, he's now at Michigan State University, we did a series of studies where we looked at tolerance or prejudice across a range of groups. So scholars had long found that people high in religious fundamentalism were prejudiced. So the idea was, if you believe that you have the unfailing view of reality and your version of religion is the one true way, that you were prejudiced towards other groups. Now, what we found was that most of this research had been done where the target groups were maybe kind of left of center groups. So they would find that people high in religious fundamentalism were prejudiced against atheists or people from the LGBT community or religious outgroup members. And so what we found is actually whether you're high or low on religious fundamentalists, you dislike the opposite group. So when you add in groups like Christians, Catholic or Protestants, Catholics, big business, the military, people low in religious fundamentalism are prejudiced towards them. So basically everybody is prejudiced towards groups they don't like. That's depressing. Isn't that depressing? That's really depressing. There has to be another way, right? There has to be another way for us to respond. It can't certainly just be the case that we're always going to dislike people who are different from us, especially when existential realities might elicit some anxiety. And so in graduate school, I was kind of getting a little depressed after this work, and I thought, might there be some ways in which being reminded of our human frailty or our human fallibility might actually generate positive outcomes? And I had the pleasure of working with, he wasn't my primary advisor, but he was my secondary advisor, and he took me under his wing and he invited me to join his lab. Dr. Everett Worthington, who's an international expert on forgiveness, maybe the international expert on forgiveness. And he and I were talking, and he thought, well, aren't there certain situations in which people are more forgiving when they're reminded about the frailty of what it's like to be human? And so it reminded us of this idea where if people are kind of near the end of their life, they might want to bring family and friends together to make things right. And so we did a series of studies where we found that when people are reminded of that one day they're going to die, they're actually much more likely to want to forgive close others. So they're much more likely to want to offer forgiveness to people who are close to them or who are similar to them. And so forgiveness might kind of help bond some of these close relationships that might have needed relational repair as a way of restoring meaning. So we felt hopeful about this. Okay, well, maybe there are ways to encounter existential realities in ways that are positive and not only defensive. And we thought that part of what forgiveness and some of these other positive responses did was help restore a sense of meaning. So we're naturally meaning makers because it helps us navigate life. And we know that meaning is comprised of three things. So work by Frank Martella and Mike Steger, and also Logan George and Crystal Park has found that there's three components to meaning. So life feels pretty meaningful first when things make sense. So when I have a sense of coherence, when I can explain why things happen or things are predictable, right? Then life makes sense. So right now, this is probably making sense. I'm not saying this because maybe I'm just being confusing, but like your experience right now is making sense because you know that the way a conference is supposed to work is you sit there and you pretend like you're paying attention, and I'm down here and I try to keep your attention by being entertaining, right? Now, if we flipped it and instead I was at the back of the room, many of you would say, this is strange. Why are you doing this, right? They wouldn't make much sense because it wouldn't fit the predicted expectation of what we have. But when things make sense, life feels pretty meaningful. A second component of meaning is what's called significance. And this is when I feel like I matter or I have value. So if there's people in your life that love you, you feel significant. If you feel like you're making a difference in the world, you feel significant. And finally, meaning, we also get meaning from a sense of purpose. And a sense of purpose is when we have a goal that's larger than ourselves. So really that purpose is kind of serving this feature of self-transcendence, right? So when a whole group is moving towards something, when I'm doing something that's not just for me, that feels pretty meaningful. So if every day the only thing I did was I woke up, I ate, I watched TV, I ate again, I watched more TV, ate again, and went to bed, I wouldn't feel like life had much purpose, right? Life would feel kind of meaningless because it's nothing larger than myself. So meaning is like social glue. It kind of holds our world together and it helps us answer these deep existential questions. So remember, I put meaning at the center of existential and positive psychology. And there's been some really interesting work that's been done that shows that religion offers a special meaning. So that religious meaning is actually more meaningful than other meanings. And I know that seems strange, but if you light a candle, there's lots of meanings for lighting a candle. You could just light a candle and it would illuminate a room, and that's fine. But if you light a candle in memory of a loved one, that's more meaningful, and that's more powerful than just lighting it to illuminate a room. And so research has found when people do things for religious reasons, it has more meaning. Okay, so bringing this together, why suffering poses a problem is because suffering undermines our sense of meaning. We all have cultural worldviews about the way the world is supposed to work. Suffering undermines, or if people encounter, experiences that cannot be explained by or integrated into their cultural worldview, it opens them up for the potential for considerable existential anxiety. So what happens is suffering undermines our assumptions about the world, and it exposes us to existential anxiety. So if you believed that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, and everyone more or less gets what they deserve. Has anybody heard of that before? Like that kind of way of thinking? It's called the just world hypothesis. That's pretty fine, and that's a pretty reasonable way of thinking as long as good things are happening to you. Because if good things are happening to you, what does it mean about who you are? Are you good or bad? It means you're good, right? Now, if bad things happen to you, you're like, well, wait a minute, that can't mean that I'm bad. Something's wrong with that worldview. And so my wife and I mentioned, my wife is a licensed clinical social worker. We wrote a paper kind of talking about how COVID-19 created a crisis of suffering because we had these cultural worldviews about the way the world was supposed to work. And COVID-19 upended those worldviews and made existential threats very, very salient. And so part of what people had to do, what some people are still trying to do in the wake of that, is make meaning out of that in order to overcome that suffering. We also know that cultivating meaning improves well-being. So with one of my students, we wanted to see whether or not people who are able to find meaning in their suffering would report better well-being than people who are unable to find meaning in their suffering. So we were really trying to use a methodologically rigorous approach, but the ethics board doesn't really like it when you randomly assign people to suffering, right? You can't quite do that. So instead, what we decided to do is we randomly assigned some people to remember a time when they had suffered, or some people just another time. And what we found was that when people randomly recalled a time of suffering and they were able to find meaning in that, they reported better well-being. So it improved, they had lower levels of anxiety, lower levels of depression, lower levels of PTSD symptoms. And in turn, that meant that they were more satisfied with their life. So we were starting to see that if suffering undermines meaning, maybe cultivating meaning is one of these kind of solutions to finding flourishing in the midst of suffering. We also have some research that shows that cultivating meaning improves our health. So when people are able to find meaning after stressful situations, they actually have better immunological responses. And so looking at data from over 3,000 individuals, we found that following stress, when people have a higher sense of meaning, on a cellular level, they're able to respond to, they have higher immunological responses than those who are unable to find meaning after those stressful events. So in my mind, and I think that the evidence is there, I think that religion is an ideal meaning system. And one of the reasons why I think it's an ideal meaning system is because religion addresses all 5 existential concerns so well. So if we just remember the existential concerns, the first is groundlessness. This is, we are living in a world largely without structure, but we have to make decisions among seemingly competing alternatives. And once we make a decision, we foreclose on alternatives, and then we have to bear the responsibility of those decisions. When you don't know the decision to make, you can turn towards your religion. What do the religious scriptures say? You could seek out guidance from a supernatural agent like God. You could pray to God or ancestors to guide your path. A second concern is isolation, our fundamental aloneness in the world. Well, what better way to overcome your aloneness than through this transcendent connection, potentially with a supernatural agent who created the entire universe and who loves you so much and knows every hair on your head, right? Who knows you intimately. That helps overcome aloneness. The third concern is identity. Who am I? Well, if you're deeply religious, you know who you are, right? Some people say, not only do I know who I am, I know whose I am, right? I'm a child of God, or I am a member of this religious group. We talked about this before, but this is where religion really shines, is by overcoming the threat of death, right? Through the promise of the afterlife, whether that's heaven, paradise, nirvana, reincarnation. Death is not the end. Death is just a comma, right? It's not a period, it's a comma. And then it overcomes meaninglessness by providing a special type of meaning, right? What better purpose than to orient your life toward this more noble, lofty goal that religions tend to offer us? So we have some research that we've done that shows this belief in literal immortality. So for people who believe that life, there is an afterlife, right? This is not all there is. It helps reduce death-related anxiety. And the way that it reduces death-related anxiety is by enhancing meaning in this life. So for those of you who are familiar with either the Christian scripture or maybe the song, "Whereof death is thy sting," right? There's literal evidence we have that belief in the literal immortality, belief in an afterlife takes the sting out of death. Right? That's one of the reasons why religion is so powerful. We also know that religion can make death meaningful, right? So we've done some research where we asked people to think about and write about their own death, which is really fun to read because we are able to read what people think about when they say they're going to die. And we had coders code, this was before ChatGPT, so they actually had to do the work. So they actually read these essays and they coded how meaningful people's responses to death were. And when people had, when they imagined dying more meaningful deaths or having more meaning at the time of death, they reported less cognitive accessibility of death-related thoughts. So by that is what we meant is that they spontaneously thought of death less often. And we assessed that using a fill-in-the-blank questionnaire where people could fill out a word in either a death-related or neutral way. So coffee versus coffin, or grave versus grade, something like that. And they had less spontaneous death-related words. And we also find this when we randomly assigned people to imagine dying a meaningful death or a meaningless death. So what I want to shift to for the remainder, a little bit of my talk here is, how do we build an existentially resilient religion, right? So this is a workshop, so I don't want to just lecture at you. I want us to have a conversation about how could we build a more existentially resilient religion. And so how can we take what we've learned from science to do this? I think there's two things that we need to think about. One is religion is not only, it's two things. It's the content, so what people believe, but it's also the style, so how they hold such beliefs. So it's not only what people believe, but also how they hold these beliefs. And there's been a lot of research on what people believe. That's probably predominated research in this area. But less research has focused on how people hold their beliefs. And so if you're thinking about, if you're coming today and you're thinking about, well, I'm a religious person and I want my religion to be able to withstand suffering when I experience it. Or I'm a religious person and I know that people are leaving religion and I'm trying to think about how can I make my religion more appealing for people who have left because of suffering. These might be some recommendations. How you are religious matters. How you hold your religiousness matters. So all of us have dual motives for security and growth. Here's what I mean by that. On the one hand, we want to feel secure. We have this desire for certainty. We want to know what the right answer is. But we also have this motive for growth and for self-expansion and for going beyond the certainty. And so oftentimes we have to balance these two perspectives, right? So if I'm really focused on security, what my colleagues and I have found is that feels psychologically really rewarding. So if you hold a religious belief system that is oriented around certainty, you are reaping a lot of benefits for that. So the research suggests you have high meaning in life, you have high psychological well-being. But there are some drawbacks to being so certain about your religious beliefs. Anybody want to guess what a drawback might be if you're really certain about your beliefs? Yes.
You actually get more close-minded.
You get more close-minded. That's exactly what we found. Yes. If you know for certain that you are right, then what does that mean about everyone else who disagrees with you? They're wrong, right? They're wrong. And you're and you become more close-minded. So what we found is that people who have these strong security beliefs are very intolerant towards people who differ from them. Then you have the other perspective, the growth-oriented perspective. So these are people who, yesterday Dr. Pargament was talking about quest orientation. These are people whose orientation is marked more by questions than answers. They embrace uncertainty. They love doubt. So the benefits for them is they're very tolerant. They get along with everybody. Oh, you have a different perspective? I want to hear that perspective. You're different from me? I want to hear that. But intrapersonally, they're very anxious. They're worried about death. They have less meaning in life. So they pay this intrapersonal penalty. So you have to balance. On the one hand, we need enough security that we're not anxious, but we need enough growth that we're not intolerant. And so that's what we're always trying to balance. We're always trying to balance these two. And so with some of my students, we found that this quest religious orientation has some benefits. So for people who are high on quest religiousness, they are more tolerant toward religiously dissimilar others. So we had Christian students evaluate either Christian or Muslim targets. And what we found was that people high in quest religiousness, these Christians, were more tolerant towards Muslims than people low on quest religiousness. But again, you have to balance, because if you're always questing, you might be anxious. So religion is a bit of a dialectic. Religion is a bit of a dialectic. It can both help and hinder our approach to suffering. And what do I mean by this? Well, let's start with the good stuff, right? We'll start with the good stuff. So on the one hand, like Dr. Pargman talked about yesterday, religion can help us with coping. It can be a strong sense of comfort, and a lot of people find social support in religion. But on the negative side, religion oftentimes creates problems with something called theodicy. So theodicy is the problem of evil, right? Why does evil exist? If there exists an all-loving, all-benevolent, all-powerful God, and something bad happens to me, or something bad happens in the world, why didn't God intervene? Is God not good? Is God not powerful? Does God not love me? Or even worse, did God cause this to happen? Now, these are highly oversimplifications, but they might be representative of what's cognitively going on in the minds of many people when they're struggling with their suffering. And in turn, they might feel anger toward God, or they might even feel forsaken by God. So I think part of what we need to do is we need to rethink religion in order to suffer well. We might need to reconsider various aspects of religion to help us improve how we suffer. So I'm going to talk about 5 very practical things. And as an experimental social psychologist, it's rare that I get practical. So I'm trying to be as helpful as I possibly can. But these are things that we can think about. This is as close as I get to clinical work. So Dr. Bingaman will have to let me know if I overstep here. 5 things that we can do, and we'll talk about each of them in turn, that are based on psychological research that should help when we inevitably find ourselves in a period of suffering. Okay. So number 1, accept rather than avoid. So we have plenty of cognitive distortions that lend us to see the world as we want it to be rather than it is, the way the world is. I think the research suggests that acceptance is the first key of metabolizing suffering. So in order to accept a situation, you have to allow yourself to feel the full weight of that suffering. So how many of you would say at some point in your life you had something that was deeply painful for you, and maybe you would say that you experienced some suffering in life? How many of you would say that is true? Yeah, many people. And those of you who are young, just wait, it'll happen. Yeah, I know, I'm very optimistic. So for me, I remember, something that happened when I was in graduate school. I was maybe 27 years old. My brother passed away suddenly, and he had 3 children under the age of 6. Very, very shocking to me. I did not want to accept it. Right when it happened, I thought, no, this can't be true. Like this can't happen. Well, sadly, I mean, it happened, right? It happened. And I didn't want to accept that reality. And then what we found out is he passed away from a genetic condition. And we later found out that my dad had this genetic condition, and he passed away, several years ago. My sister has this genetic condition. I'm constantly being monitored by doctors to make sure that this is not my fate. Now, what I could do is I could say, I don't hear, like, I could avoid it, but that's not going to help me, right? That's not going to take the suffering away. What I have to do is I have to accept this is what happened, and I have to feel the weight of suffering. At least as a male raised in America, feelings are not highly socially acceptable. I'm not sure what the cultural norms are here in Hong Kong, but for men to have feelings in America, it's very frowned upon. It's more frowned upon than it is for women. But as a human, we have to allow those emotions. We have to experience, acknowledge, and feel those emotions. If we avoid, we end up getting stuck in our suffering, and we end up being isolated. The second thing that we need to do is we need to rethink the meaning of grief. So for many people, their suffering involved grief. I saw a therapist who helped me understand that grief is actually a measure of love. And so many times suffering is about loss, whether that's losing a loved one, whether that's losing a way of life that was, and maybe now it's not like that anymore. Maybe it's losing what could have been, right? It's losing some future dream that you thought you had. Maybe you wanted children, but you can't have children. Maybe you wanted a future profession. You can't have that profession. This hope for a future. One of the things that might be helpful is that the amount of grief we feel is directly related to the amount of love that we've experienced, right? So if you deeply grieve having lost someone, that means that you loved them so much. And that grief is not a bad thing. It's a reminder of the love that you had for that person, right? So if something were to happen to me and I passed away and no one grieves me, probably means no one loved me, right? If they're just like, oh, whatever, let's go get dinner, we don't care, right? Then that's very sad. That means maybe nobody loved me very much. But if people did grieve me, maybe it means that they loved me. And if I grieve other people, it's probably because I loved them. So just rethinking what grief is. A third thing is suffering often encourages us to rethink and rebuild our assumptions about the world. So I would say, at least for me, when my brother passed away, that started a period of me rethinking my religious beliefs. And by a period of time, maybe a decade, like it was a long time. Maybe I'm a slow learner. I must not be very smart, but it was a decade of me rethinking these beliefs. Because we have assumptions about the way the world is supposed to work, and when suffering violates those, we may need to update our assumptions. And so we have to critically question our beliefs. And this is a painful process. This is not easy, right? This is not like, oh, I enjoy problem solving and critical thinking. This is a deeply personal and challenging process, but it's often necessary if we want to have an authentic and more accurate view of the world. So oftentimes it looks like what's called deconstructing or breaking down your beliefs, evaluating each of them. Does this belief still hold? Yes or no. Go to the next belief. Does this belief still hold? Yes or no. And rebuilding them into something that better explains your suffering. So for example, when people struggle, like, where was God in the tragedy? How can you make sense of, what was God's plan? What was God thinking? Maybe a good way of thinking about that is, yeah, I don't know. They're like, what do you mean you don't know? Well, I believe that God loves me, and I don't know what the plan was, but that's okay. I'm coming to terms with that uncertainty. Sometimes it might be, not always, a set of beliefs that's actually quite different. Maybe this is what happens when you talk about God and suffering, Yeah.
accept it.
Yeah, accept it. Exactly. We can't avoid it. We just have to accept it.
Why now?
Yeah, why now? Yeah, exactly. It could have been before, could have been now. Why now? Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, great. All right. Yay, we did it. Yay. Okay. So the fourth thing we might need to do is invest in relationships. So think about take a second. Think about the most meaningful moment in your life, most meaningful memories in your life. Just take a moment. Okay. Were you alone or were you with other people? How many of you were completely alone when this happened? Nobody. Yeah. How many of you are with other people? Yes, everyone's with other people, right? So when we're thinking about where do we find this meaning, relationships, by and large, across cultures, across ages, across all types of demographics, they are the wellspring of meaning. If you're looking for meaning, you don't have to look much further than starting with relationships. So investing in relationships, even in the times of suffering, are particularly valuable. So we have this fundamental need to belong, including when we're suffering. It doesn't go away. I know when I'm suffering, I want people to leave me alone. I just want to be by myself. That's terrible. That's not a good response for me. I, like everyone else, need other people, need to invest in relationships. And what we find, this is what I've found anyway. If you've found other people who have experienced suffering, they might be a little bit more compassionate to your suffering because they know what it's like. And it opens them up to a sense of vulnerable compassion. They can appreciate, sadly, what you're going through. And sometimes there can be a sense of connection because of a shared understanding of the pain of suffering. And then the fifth thing we can't forget when we're suffering is to go beyond ourselves. Self-transcendence is a pathway towards meaning. Dr. Yaden talked about this yesterday or the day before. So self-transcendence is this pathway toward meaning. When we go beyond ourselves, life feels more meaningful. So we're thinking about things like investing in religion, right? Being part of this larger cosmic story. Virtuous or pro-social behavior, so volunteering, doing charity work, giving back to one's community, joining a larger cause or social movement can feel meaningful. And something as simple as helping others, right? Helping a neighbor, helping a family member. So I think that when we're considering religion, religion can help us do all five of those things. It can help us accept, right? It can help us go beyond ourselves. It can help us invest in relationships. Sometimes we might have to rebuild our religion, but religion can do those things. But religion can also do one other powerful thing, and that's to offer us an existential hope. So maybe it's because I work at Hope College, and we always talk about hope all the time. We love hope. Hope is our namesake. Our president loves hope. President of our college, not of our yeah, president of our college, I should say, loves hope. And so I'm thinking about hope all the time. And I think that religion can offer us this deep existential hope. You know, but the way that positive psychology has talked about hope up until now has really been limited. And so if there are any students who are wondering, what should I study? I really want to make my mark on psychology. Hope. I'm being completely serious. We need a much better understanding of hope. Right now, and maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic, but sometimes I think hope can run the risk of being four things. It can be delusional, right? So sometimes people think it's hoping when you're expecting impossible things. So if I were to say, I hope that I will make the American football team the Kansas City Chiefs, do you think that that's real? Look at me. Do you think that I could make the Chiefs football team? No. Maybe I could get them Gatorade or water, right? But I would not make the team. that would be delusional, right? That would be like a delusional hope. Our current conceptualizations of hope are also diminished. So right now we talk about hope in terms of what's called agency and pathways, right? Do I feel like I have the agency to get things done, and do I have the pathways to accomplish this desired outcome? It's really just self-efficacy. There's nothing about hope in there. It's basically, can I do it all myself? Hope can also be disengaged. So sometimes I hear people who are like, oh, I hope one day I will get married and have a family. Oh, that's great. What are you doing about that? Well, nothing. I just hope that I will. Well, that's great. I hope that I'll be a billionaire. But if I don't do anything about, well, it'll still never happen. But right, I have to do something to make those things happen. And oftentimes hope ignores existential realities. It doesn't take into consideration the boundedness of what it means to be human. So with my wife, Sarah Showalter Van Tongeren, we offered a new conceptualization of existential hope that spells out the acronym of hope. So the first is that it's humble. I think a true, authentic hope is humble because it's honestly rooted in reality. I realize that there are some things I probably should not hope for because they would be delusional for them to happen. So for example, and I know that this is, this might be hard to hear, but you might have a relationship with a family member that you've tried time and time and time again to improve. And maybe it just never got better. So an honest engagement of reality would say, well, maybe I need to stop hoping for this type of relationship with them and adjust my expectations and hope for a different one. And rather than hope that they can meet all of my needs, maybe I just hope that we can be civil and get along at family functions. And maybe that's all I can hope for. It also needs to be optimistic. It needs to anticipate a positive future outcome. For the P, it's participatory. So it requires personal involvement. So I will hope for something, but then I will join alongside and try to get this future accomplished. And it's existential. It acknowledges the bounded limitations of what it means to be human. So from this, we think there are two hypotheses. One is the hopeful acceptance hypothesis. Individuals demonstrating high levels of existential hope will more readily and easily accept existential realities by being less defensive in light of making these ultimate concerns cognitively salient. And then also the hopeful resilience hypothesis. So that's when individuals high in hope will have greater resilience and endurance in the midst of suffering, marked by greater meaning and well-being amid adversity. And so if we're thinking about pulling all these threads together to build an existentially resilient religion, I talk about in my book how I think that many parts of the world, especially in the West, are undergoing what I call a great disillusionment. People are leaving religion, right? There are more people are de-identifying. Increasingly a high number of people are becoming religious duns. And religious adherents may need to think about how they're conceptualizing religion. So if you're thinking, well, I'm religious and I want to think about how to keep people in religion, here would be my 4 recommendations for building an existentially resilient religion, or if you want to stay religious in the midst of suffering. And these are based on why people told us they are leaving. So the first thing that religious institutions can do is avoid becoming stagnant, avoid stagnation. Right? So oftentimes people get more progressive, the institutions don't keep up, and then the people leave. Then the institutions are like, well, why did you leave? And they said, well, we told you we didn't agree. And you said, well, then just leave. And then we did. And then you couldn't believe that we did. So avoiding stagnation. A second is people have told us that they leave because of spiritual abuse and trauma. This one's very simple. Stop the trauma and abuse. Right, and hold people accountable when they engage in these actions of abuse and trauma. The third is we need to develop richer, thicker theologies and accounts of suffering. We need to create space for not knowing why suffering happens. We need to create space for being okay that that suffering occurs, that evil exists in the world. And then we need to rewrite the meaning of religion through our actions, not through arguing with a belief. So this is one of the things that people have told me time and again. Sometimes people who are very strongly committed to their religion will argue just to prove that they are right, screaming things like, my religion is right, God is love, why can't you believe me? And it's like, well, that doesn't seem very loving. And so remembering that you're dealing with people and not dehumanizing people who disagree with you. Okay, so here's my parting thoughts, and then we'll have some time for Q&A, I think. I think that an honest engagement with existential realities is the pathway to flourishing. So if you're looking for how can I find flourishing in life, how can I find a full, rich life, I think it starts with acknowledging, accepting, and honestly engaging with these existential realities. With one's religion or without one's religion, we have to acknowledge and accept these realities. All right, I'd love to hear your Q&A. And again, for those who are interested in the book on leaving religion, there's the QR code. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Van Tongeren. Yeah. So when we accept that we have some technical problems, I think we also learn and grow.
Yes.
So any questions on the floor or online? Thank you, Ivy.
I'm a total beginner of positive psychology. I hope my questions won't be too stupid and shallow. Well, if I say I like taking revenge and I truly believe in an eye for an eye, what recommendations would you give me and how would you analyze it?
Okay. Yeah, so the question is, if I'm a firm believer in revenge, what recommendation would I give you? Right. Yeah, so I think it's natural. I think humans evolved with a revenge instinct, like a vengeance instinct. Mike McCullough talks about this kind of natural tendency I think we have towards revenge. And I think there are revenge serves a purpose. So if somebody does something against me and I lash out at them and I enact revenge, everyone else sees, oh, if you do something against Daryl, he's going to respond like that. Don't do anything against him. So it does serve a purpose. But it's probably not the best response. It is probably not a response I would recommend. And so what I recommend in situations where you want to get revenge instead is I think about three things. So one is set firm boundaries with that person to protect yourself in the future. So you say, like, you did this thing, not going to happen anymore. So I'm going to set a firm boundary. The second is you can forgive them, but forgiveness is different than reconciliation. And so forgiveness happens inside of you. So you can say, I'm going to forgive you because I don't want to walk around the rest of my life harboring hatred towards you, because that's like carrying acid and never doing anything with it. It's just going to eat you up. And then the third is I would probably, if they're not safe, I would just end the relationship. So make sure that reconciliation is different. So boundaries, forgiveness, and then maybe not reconcile if they're not safe. Yeah.
Thank you. That's not easy.
No, it's not, especially if it's someone you love and who is in your family or who's you regularly interact with. What I'm saying is not easy at all. So I want to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Any questions? Oh, Alvin.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing. And I think it's a really interesting topic, and I do believe religion is like a strong belief to accept suffering. But my question is, me myself is not religious, so I believe that belief will fade. So how about in the long term? Do you think religion is still a good way to accept suffering in the long term? Maybe like 3 years, 4 years, or maybe 10 years later. Do you think it's a good way to do so?
Yeah. So is religion a good way to accept suffering? I do. So I actually did, and I know this might seem strange. I write books about people leaving religion. All of what I study is, kind of the dark side of religion. I actually think religion has these huge benefits. I think one of the things that religion does so well that we underestimate is religion reminds us of our smallness, our appropriate smallness, and that the entire world is not about us. I think that's very important, and I think that religion, if it's practiced honestly, can instill in us an existential humility, where we realize that our existence is not our own, and it is bound and because of other things that are larger than us. And if we cultivate that, we should have so much existential gratitude that every morning, like Dr. Bingaman is saying, we should just be overwhelmed with just the gratitude of being alive, of being one of 14 trillion, 400 trillion odds of being alive. That type of gratitude, I think, would center us into disabusing us of these narcissistic fantasies that I think have caused a lot of problems. So it's a long way of saying, I think religion's great. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. It is, but I don't think it's the scourge of humanity, nor do I think it's the crown jewel of culture. I think it's somewhere in between, but I still think there is absolutely a place for it.
Yeah, even Darren talked about people who leave the religion, but those people, they also have some religious beliefs. They still hold on to religious beliefs and also life values. Yeah, but also I think also give the church leaders some reflection too. Don't just talk about religion. We need to live out the religion. I think that's very important in not only inside the church, but also outside the church in our lives. I think that's very important. A lot of time, churches also have KPIs, and but a lot of time we say, oh, outside my church, inside my church. But I think the church should be open to everyone when they need the religion. Yeah, I think that's very important too. And also, the church also need to outreach people. Not inside the church. I think they need to outreach the community too. I think that's very important. Yeah. Any further questions?
Thank you for your talk that cover a lot of areas. And actually, as you talk, I have been thinking about other areas that is very similar to your work. One is the ACT therapy. Another is the Thrive Center in Fuller University or seminary, the Thrive Center. And then Parkerman's religious coping. And actually, years ago, we have done an experiment when people are facing social unrest and the epidemic kind of threat. And we found that people using the religious coping method reduce their anxiety. And there are two very important coping methods that people use. One is that they know that God has certain purpose for their suffering. The second is that they still experience God's company. And these two are the most important and remedial kind of coping thinking or concept that people use. But I want to know that there are, as you talk, there are several other methods that is similar to your work. And how do you consider that?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, so I was aware of the first one, so aware of the ACT, so acceptance commitment therapy, and yeah, and largely probably what I'm recommending or suggesting you could probably pull from lots of different theoretical perspectives or scientific threads or even sources of wisdom. And I think you're right. I think they do kind of converge on accepting the world as it is, seeing the world as it is, and moving forward with that clarity. Yeah, thank you for that.
Any more questions? Oh.
Hey, Daryl, that's a very, very good talk. So when you talk about meaning, especially cultivating meaning, that it can mean meaning can means a lot of can mean a lot of different things. Like yesterday, there was a celebrity in Hong Kong who passed away at the age of 83, Chai Lan. So his view, I think his philosophy, the meaning, he's constantly talking about is enjoy the moment. By enjoying the moment, he means hedonism. He's constantly bragging about the women he dated, how many he had sex with. Also, he enjoys the food, all kinds of cuisines. He became an expert. So I guess my question is, when we talk about the suffering and also the meaning cultivated through suffering, or people built through suffering, that can go in very different directions. Some people through suffering they find God. Some people they probably find, sex, or could it be something else? So I wonder, could you share insights on, how to, go from, suffering to one direction or to another direction?
Yeah, no, yeah, thanks, Jean-Chen. So no, that's a great question. And so, when I'm thinking about those things, I think people might colloquially use meaning to describe hedonism, but I think I might put hedonism and kind of kind of pursuit of subjective well-being or pleasure, probably more in happiness than meaning. And so Roy Baumeister and colleagues had this paper where they differentiated between happiness and meaning. And so what they argued were some things about happiness is like it's in the moment it feels good, and it's more like temporally in the present, but it doesn't really offer like a deeper sense of meaning, and it's not very resilient against suffering. Whereas meaning is more resilient to adversity and suffering. It's more long-standing. And so without being too prescriptive and without being too philosophically charged, my sense is probably that approach of hedonism is probably less effective in making suffering, in metabolizing suffering in productive ways. I do think that sometimes people might use things that feel good in the moment to reduce their momentary anxiety as like an avoidant coping response. So at least my students in the United States, whenever they feel anxious about homework, they just binge watch Netflix. And I'm not sure if any of you do that or not. Or they, will, do unhealthy behaviors. But that's not going to help metabolize the suffering. So I think I'd steer people more towards the kind of the outward facing meaning rather than the inward facing pure happiness.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Let's to give another big round of applause to Professor Van Tongeren. Yeah. And I think the Positive Psychology 2.0 International Conference 2025 is coming to end very soon. Yeah. But it's not the ending. I think it's just the beginning. Yeah, because as mentioned by the two keynote speakers, kind of the dark side of human beings, or maybe in our life, kind of is common among us, right? Felix, you may not feel the suffering, right? Or you may feel the suffering when you work for me, okay? But it's a chance for you to think and rebuild. Yeah, but I would like to sum up a few points because I think we had a good turnout and a very successful and fruitful and meaningful international conference. First, as I mentioned in the opening ceremony, this conference is the 4th episode of this positive psychology series. And I think we can see the integration from the two workshops, keynote workshop of the two keynote speakers. Yeah, we start with positive neuroscience in 2018. And then we had the second conference on on meaning in life in 2022. Yeah, and then after the conference, one of my former colleagues passed away with cancer. I think some of you know that. And then in 2023, we held the Positive Technologies conference. And then today, this time we hosted the Positive Psychology 2.0 conference. And then I'm sure we will have next. But we can see the integration. We kind of move from the earlier positive psychology theories, westernized theories, and more tended to focus more on the positives and ignore the negatives or suffering. And right now we move on. And then I'm sure we will have next conference very soon. But I can tell you it's getting harder and harder because we submit 2 times for the meaning in life proposal because at first the reviewer said it was an old topic. And then for this one, it's even harder. We submit three times, and finally we got it. The first time we used the psychology of religion. Yeah, they gave us very bad comments. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, and then finally we yeah, maybe after the COVID, we submit a proposal. We say psychology of spirituality and transcendence, and maybe yeah, I think because also of the situation of the world, more wars, more earthquakes, and more people suddenly, I mean, around us, they got long-term illness. So I think it's getting more common and common, and also because of the aging population as well. Yeah, but I think we can see the synergies across the 4 international conference, and I think we can move on. And then second, I think over a decade ago, Professor William James wrote a book called "The Varieties of Religious Experience," kind of the study of human nature, right? And I think for this time, wow, I just count the number. We have over 750 non-duplicate registrants across 34 countries, including Africa and Latin America. I think that's amazing. And also, we have, I think the head counts, we have almost 3,600 head counts of participation across the 4 days. So I think psychology of spirituality, religion, and transcendence is still a very important topic across cultures, across different ages, and across different religions, and also across different professions. I think that's very important. We need to explore that, and we always discuss about that, the spirituality integrated practice, or maybe also in our teaching, or on definitely the research. And thirdly, during the international conference, we have witnessed a lot of young scholars. Our young, some undergraduate students, some graduate students, they deliver their first. I think they gave their first presentations to us. Very amazing. Kind of the first time they presented in the international conference, and they did a fantastic job. And I find out that I'm already an academic grandfather. Okay, so yeah, and also my nephew is here to help me too. So and also I have my cousin. What is that called? I don't know. I'm my cousin grandchild, granduncle, right? I don't know, granduncle. He is also helping us too. So I think that's very important. I think that's because this is a very important topic. I think we should carry forward and pay it forward, and we should pass on generation by generation. Yeah, because this is part of the human nature, and especially right now, the young people. You mentioned about that. The young people, they may not have that suffering experience, but at the same time, they are less grateful. Some people mentioned that, but I do have the accidental hope. The young people, yeah, but actually maybe the young people that interacting with their parents is very suffering or something like that. But I think they can build a relationship. Yeah, don't just especially in this digital age, I think it's an opportunity. They can also practice religion in spirituality and transcendence in a digital age. But at the same time, I think indeed I would say not because they don't have suffering experience, but their suffering experience may be different from our generation, I would say. Yeah, and right now it's not easy. For example, one of my kids, she will have a public college exam next year. she can't go to travel with me because she need to study for the whole summer. And lastly, I think most very grateful that we have built a platform uh, for, I think, positive psychology 2.0 or maybe 3.0, 4.0. I think it's not just for research or maybe practice collaborations. I think most importantly, I think all of us in our teaching, maybe also in our practice, in our research, also in our lives, we have weaknesses, or maybe we have experienced a lot of existential crisis, death, pain, suffering, lost. I think we all agree that. But at the same time, I think this topic is very important, because when we can accept, embrace, and these negative sides and dark sides as part of us, we can have existential hope. We can also keep growing and being more flourishing. And also we can learn how to love, be compassionate, and care people, mindful caring. And also we can build faith and strength in our lives to face upcoming adversities, difficulties, challenges, and suffering. Life is not easy, but I think life is still very beautiful. You know, during the opening sections, I almost cry out. I've been back to Hong Kong for 13 years. I have faced a lot of several loss of my relatives and friends. And at the same time, I faced a lot of challenges and difficulties, not only in my work, but also in my life. And I also experienced spiritual struggles and asked God why. But at the same time, when I saw a lot of friends, some of them I have known for many years, okay, and a lot of collaborators, colleagues, students, I'm amazed. I think I can survive out of how many trillion, something like that, because of them, because of you. I think that's very important. I think from the suffering, from the dark side in my life, I learned about to treasure every person I encounter and treasure your help, support, and friendship. I think that's very important. So please say hi to someone and say, oh, add oil in Hong Kong mean, yeah, to the one next to you. Okay. I think kind of before we end the conference, say something to someone next to you or touch on his shoulder or her shoulder. Yes. Yeah. 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 Because that's important, because I practice self-compassion. Sometimes we don't know how to have self-compassion. First of all, you show compassion to your friend, and you learn that you are your own friend, and God is your friend. You need to learn how to self-compassionate. Okay, so thank you for Kirk, and also Darren, and also thank you for all the keynote speakers and presenters and all the participants. Without any, and all the OCs, IAC, IOCs, and all the various departments, especially my admin team, they are very, very, well, they're, I think without them, I can't survive, especially there are several technical forums. And again, give them a big hands, yeah.